Well, thank you, Gabby, and to the Clean Air Partnership team for hosting this webinar. I scrolled through the list of folks who joined us. There are quite a few familiar names and some new. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today on this webinar. And what I'd like to focus on in the next 15 to 20 minutes or so of discussion is what can we collectively do to help reduce the risk of flooding and associated financial and psychosocial costs, some of which you see depicted on the cover slide of my presentation. What can we do collectively to help reduce these costs and damages? And by way of agenda, I will first outline the nature of the climate change challenge in Canada, with flooding being the elephant in the room when it comes to extreme weather costs and pervasiveness that we witness across the country, and then turn to the research reports, guidelines, and standards that have already been published and available for us to use that contain the technical guidance on what can we do to help limit flood costs across Canada, and feature some case studies, which I think may be helpful for the audience that joined the webinar in our daily lives. And then we'll turn to the discussion, as Gabby mentioned, on some of the actions that can be taken to help limit flood risk. We can discuss them in more detail as we near the end of the webinar. And so what you see on the slide that I'm presenting right now is an updated catastrophic insurable losses chart that is prepared by Insurance Bureau of Canada. On the y-axis, it has billions of dollars in 2020 dollars. On the x-axis, it's the time scale going from 1983 to 2020. And overall, it depicts the catastrophic insurable losses that property and casualty insurance industry experiences as a whole in Canada. And in order for an event, whether it's flood, fire, hailstorm, to be classified catastrophic, per event cost has to have exceeded $25 million in insured damages. So what you see on this graph are only these really big catastrophic events tallied up annually and presented in a one-stop shopping place. And of course, the concerning part of this, that as a function of time in Canada, we are seeing an increase in catastrophic insurable losses associated with extreme weather events. We can actually take this graph, multiply it 3 to 4 times to start arriving at the total economic costs associated with extreme weather in Canada, because as a rule of thumb, for every dollar of insured loss, there are $3 to $4 that are incurred by governments, businesses, individuals. And at a level of an individual Canadian, what we are seeing in some communities where chronic flooding has occurred, that flood insurance may be increasing in price, decreasing in availability, or there may be cap limits available to homeowners in the range of $10,000 to $20,000, which is less than the average cost to fix a house following a flood event in Canada at $43,000, all of which presents a concern and a question. Well, what can we really do to help Canadians adapt to this growing cost and challenge of flooding that is manifested all across the country? And just to reflect on the other costs, not financial, but mental stress cost, we surveyed the community in Burlington, Ontario in 2017. And Burlington had a flood in 2014, August, where over 3,500 homes were flooded. And we surveyed some residents of Burlington that have been impacted, their basement was flooded, some who haven't. And we found out that those people who had to live through a flooded basement, they had to take 7 days of work to fix the home following the event, which was actually 10 times the provincial average. And overall, because we were doing the survey 3 years later after the flood, we found that the stress associated with living through such event lingered. So 50% of respondents who were impacted by a flood still worried every time that it rained, Even at night, they may be staying up, checking their basement to make sure that water is not seeping through the walls and causing damages again. So the mental stress impact of those people who had to live through a flood event lingers, and it's a very real impact as well. Now I'm going to turn from the context and the problem to solutions. So everything I just presented probably made you feel a little bit depressed, but the good news is that Canada has demonstrated, I would say, global leadership to create national guidelines and standards that outline what we can do to help limit flood risk at a level of a home, at a level of new community design, and at a level of existing communities. And as well, we have industry associations such as RealPAC and BOMA Canada, who have contributed to the development of guidelines on how owners and managers of commercial buildings like office towers can play a role in flood resilience for commercial real estate. Insurance Bureau of Canada, International Institute for Sustainable Development helped also to create a framework on how to assess the value of nature for flood resilience benefits that it offers. So we have all this guidance available to us to actually understand what we can do to help limit flood risk. And before the webinar, Gabby asked me to reflect on some of the content that may be presented in these guidelines and standards. And so, for example, when I think back about flood resilient design for new residential communities standard, CSA W204, some of the requirements presented in that standard are not introducing new residential development in known areas of flood risk, such as in the floodplain, stress testing the design of major and minor systems to make sure that it's able to accommodate operational failures or extreme weather events without causing private property damages, installing backwater valves on storm and sanitary sewer laterals, making sure that the downspout pipes and sump pump discharge pipes are not connected to sanitary sewer laterals, and so on. So a lot of this guidance presented in these documents is highly practical and operationalized, but I will go into deep dives now in terms of sharing some case studies where it's being applied on the ground by various communities across Canada. And so, as Gabby mentioned, last week, Intox Center has published a report, the development of which was supported by Stearns Council of Canada, and it's called Under One Umbrella. It profiles a full range of different guidelines and standards that help folks address the issues of urban flooding. And it spells out some of the most practical, and that means technically feasible and cost-effective actions that homeowners, tenants, governments at different levels, commercial real estate owners and managers, various professionals involved in buying, selling, insuring property and real estate, ENGO, community conservation authorities, investors, what each one of these groups can actually do practically on the ground today to help reduce flood risk. And some of these actions may not cost a lot of money or take too long to implement. So let me share just a few examples. So at the level of a home, a few years ago, Intact Center worked with municipalities across Canada to investigate across 600 properties what are the typical flood-related vulnerabilities that we witness across Canada in terms of property level flood vulnerability. And outside the home, we frequently found that downspouts and sump pump discharge pipes may be discharging water right next to the foundation walls of a house, that the grading around the property may be such that when it rains, the water flows towards the house as opposed to away from the property. Issues that we found were common inside the house, where, to Gabby's earlier point, some pump not having backup power alarm systems. We frequently saw electronics, expensive, valuable items right on the floor in the basement, exposed to water damage. Frequently, floor drains were obstructed as well with carpets and boxes and so on. So if the water were to get inside the house, it may not be drained effectively. And then we've also seen a slew of maintenance issues where backwater valves may not have been cleaned, or some pumps have not been tested to make sure they're operational. And these are highly addressable risks where a homeowner can take an action in a matter of a few hours over the weekend to mitigate them. And so we encourage homeowners to use, for example, tools like the ones you can see featured on this slide. One is a home flood protection checkup app. It essentially takes a homeowner inside their house and outside of their property, points out various common flood vulnerabilities, and directs them towards mitigation actions that they can take in and around their property to mitigate these vulnerabilities. It essentially spells out a homework to-do list for a homeowner based on their particular property after a 10-minute assessment. We've also created an infographic, also presented on this slide, that profiles either zero cost or low cost actions, again, that homeowners can immediately deploy to help lower flood risk in and around their property, starting from clearing catch basins from leaves and debris, or installing plastic window well covers for basement windows, and so on. And in terms of making use of these materials, some municipalities, and this is an example from Nova Scotia and Antigonish, have made use of these materials. And for example, in June 2020, Antigonish has distributed that infographic that I showed in the previous slide to 25,000 of their residents vis-a-vis property tax mailing. And that was very innovative and also very practical, because it made sure that the infographic on what you can do to limit flood risk wasn't dismissed necessarily by residents as junk mail. And the cost of doing that is also reasonable. It costs 25 cents per page to print an infographic and insert it in a mail out campaign that's already going out to residents. So we hope that examples like this could be followed by other localities in Canada as well. Another example is there's right now Fleming and Seneca colleges offering 14-week training courses for municipal representatives, real estate agents, home inspectors, and others on how to assess home flood risk in Canada and how to address it. And we've also created a condensed version of that course that takes only an hour and a half to complete for insurance brokers, mortgage professionals, home inspectors in Canada. And there is a forthcoming course, also 1.5 hour long, for real estate agents as well. So it's probably a worthwhile thought to see whether local brokers or inspectors could be engaged in taking this course, because really these individuals interact with homeowners and tenants on a regular basis, whether it's home buy and sell cycle, mortgage renewal, or insurance renewal cycle, and they're very effective in communicating the need to address flood risk and what can be practically done to help address it. Now, another important consideration in terms of flood resilience, and a frequently asked question that we get at the Intech Center, is, can nature play a role in flood resilience? And the answer is absolutely. There are various studies that have been done either by Insurance Bureau of Canada, International Institute for Sustainable Development, WWF, Municipal Natural Assets Initiative, and others that document the dollars and cents value of conserving wetlands, ponds, forests, and other green spaces in terms of the benefits that these actions provide for flood risk reduction to downstream communities. And so in addition to the flood benefits that natural infrastructure solutions provide, they also simultaneously deliver many other benefits that traditional gray infrastructure solutions may not provide, such as biodiversity and habitat protection, water quality improvement, maybe carbon sequestration in some cases, or recreational value to nearby residents as well. And in all of this research, we think that the business case for considering natural infrastructure for flood attenuation is robust, but it's important for conservation authorities to continue and local governments and NGOs to continue inventorizing natural assets, assessing their dollars and cents value for climate resilience benefits that they offer, and communicating it widely to help various stakeholders be aware of this business case that natural solutions present for climate resilience. Otherwise, it goes unnoticed. And so, to conclude and really to open the floor to the discussion and feedback, was wondering what you think about the following action to encourage flood resilience in our local communities. Whether you think it's a good idea to adopt nationally recognized standards that I mentioned earlier and reflect them, as Gabby suggested, in green development standards, stormwater management guidelines, climate adaptation plans, and so on. Whether you think the example of distributing information packs to homeowners and residents vis-a-vis tax mailings is a good example and indeed could be followed. Whether the training programs to municipal staff and local professionals are valuable and we could help get some enrollment. And whether you are interested in assessing natural assets, communicating their value in dollars and cents, and collaborating with partners such as Municipal Natural Assets Initiative, for example, that have methodologies to do so that are well vetted and credible. So really, it's more like a question: how can we work together? We are here as a resource, and we would like to collaborate to advance flood resilience in Canada today. Thank you.